question. All right, so go ahead.
I mean, it's
Now I can't hear you again.
not at all.
That was a little bit better.
And now, hello, hello, hello.
Hello, yeah, hello is very weak. Just a moment ago it was strong.
How about now?
That's excellent.
Yeah, my computer mic is kind of better than the headphone mic. Okay, so I'll just do it that way.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, I mean, I just it's hard to talk about it. I just had like kind of first a few days of like dissatisfaction, and then like dropping the craving for it to go away a little bit, and then it like something clicked, and everything's like a little bit more open now. I mean, yeah, that's just I had that kind of feeling a few times in my past with all this meditation path and stuff and Dhamma, and yeah, it's hard to explain. It's just a little bit more space around things, and I'm enjoying the moment more when I see that I was distracted or in delusion or something, and I don't beat myself up as much when I see it as I did before. Although I didn't want to do it, but it still was like a habit to do it a little bit. So yeah.
Yes, I understand what you're talking about. We put that under partly the qualification of um, right noble effort.
Yeah.
That we actually have to take that right effort to do it. If we're going to take control over our lives, then we actually have to do that. And I also like that you're saying that even though you recognize that the mind gets obstructed, that you can, in fact, clean that out. That's, as we've talked before, the very first noble step
Yeah.
is to
And
say, I can do this. I can do the effort to bring myself out of my own self-constructed misery.
yeah, yeah. I mean, what I could like drop the last few days is like before I saw some like something in my mind that I didn't want there, and I like try to smash it and then get it
Mm.
out. Like, but now it's like it's not that that I have to like destroy it. It's more like okay, that's there, but I gonna incline towards something more satisfying, and then the other stuff just drops away after a few seconds. That's what
Okay. A way of thinking about it is those thoughts are more like a naughty child than
yeah,
they are an adversary or an enemy.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, or like I would like it's like like training a little dog, right? You wouldn't beat it if he doesn't get it after the first time.
Exactly. How do you learn? How does a dog, or how do we teach a dog to come? Is when he does come, we reward him every time.
Hmm.
Even if you have to call him 5 times, when he does come, you reward him. All right. And exactly that same thing with the mind, too. Even though it's a little bit difficult sometimes to, or we call it difficult, to chase uh, an obstruction, a hindrance, thought of the past or the future out of the mind, only to have it come right back. And we chase it out again, and it comes right back. And we chase it out again. But if we continue to think about it in the sense of a naughty child, or in the sense of a puppy that's in training, then in fact it can become amusing.
Mm.
It can become amusing. Oh, I thought I'd gotten rid of you, and here you are right back again. And it can be anything like that. It can be an email that we have on our mind that we have to write,
Yeah.
or a discussion that needs to be finished, or a task that needs to be done. Because we do have to deal with the real world, and whatever country. I imagine that Germany has a lot of requirements for its citizens. You have to do this and go there and whatnot. Here in Thailand, I've got it down to about once a year to go for visa. But in fact, this week I'm going to Bangkok. I'll be leaving here on the morning of the 6th, so that I can be for the embassy, American embassy, at 7:30 in the morning on the 7th. Kitty's passport has expired, and they only give 5 years to a child. And so while I'm there, I'm going to take care of some other business that is actually years old that needs to be done, and is finally going to be done because I haven't gone to Bangkok in more than 5 years. So I've got some 5-year-old business that I've got to do there also. Uh, so I do recognize that there are things that have to be done. The question is, in this regard, of how many times am I going to review all of this old paperwork before I agree with myself that I've got all of the papers that I need? Do I have to only do it twice, or do I have to do it 4, 5, 6 times of going over all of those papers to make sure that we've got every? Because to get Kitty's passport renewed, there is so much stuff. So much stuff. They want birth certificate, her birth certificate translated from Thai to English. They want her certificate of foreign birth. They want 5 years worth of photographs to prove to them. They want both the mother and all of her identification, and the father and all of his identification, before they're going to renew that passport. The U.S. has gotten really strange about all of that stuff. All right. The reason I can rattle it off like that is because I've spent too much time making sure that we've got all of the paperwork. But that's the human mind. The question is can we, when we do that, we can we say, all right, I will check it again, and I will do it when Tam is home and when there's a good time to do it? Or am I going to think about doing it and feel bad the whole time, just going over it and over and over and again? And it actually doesn't matter what that task is. If we've only got one task to do, that task is going to be done in the mind 1,000 times, unless we start watching for it and throwing it out every time. Oh, we don't have to think about that right now. We don't have to think about that right now. All right, but it keeps coming back. And so I know what you're talking about, but always we keep track of that right view, that I can throw this stuff out of my mind. I will only entertain it as long as it's entertaining me, and when it becomes suffering, then out it goes. So that's a good report. I'm glad that you're seeing that.
Yeah.
Because now you're beginning to recognize just what your job is going to be for the rest of your life. It's keeping the stuff out of the mind that invades the mind and causes us to be in the future or in the past. But you're developing the skill to do that. And you know that you can do it. And you're getting confidence that you can do that. All right. That confidence that we're talking about here is actually the eradication of the doubt. One of the most important qualities of doubt is people who think that they may or may not be able to succeed in their life. That we start off as victims. Will I be a victim my whole life is basically how it is. Or what can I do to change out of being a victim into a winner.
Mm.
And some people look for money, material goods, they follow the ways of everyone else, and they always keep that doubt because they have never seen anyone become happy and successful with money. But now we have the Dhamma. Now real eradication of doubt is going on because you can see over and over again that in fact you can begin to control your own mind.
Mm.
All right.
And
This
then,
is, go ahead.
uh, yeah, I also like could see that you talked about a lot about the false positives and then how that's like coming through evolution and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you can really see like how often your mind, yeah, just worries like without really reason for it. And yeah, if you see a few times that that you can just clean it out, however big this worry is, because it's just a image, but basically, um, yeah, then it's just really freeing.
Yes, this is what we mean by freedom. Now you're beginning to understand freedom because the real freedom is the freedom from our own mental self-flagellation. That's what real freedom is. And so that freedom in this regard comes from the eradication of doubt, that we know now that we can do this. The reason that I'm bringing this topic up in this respect is because we have covered all of the fetters except for one. And yet you just started talking about it without recognizing it. And that is that issue of doubt. And in the beginning, it's doubt about what is life. Doubt is about all of the lies that we've been told. And in fact, the doubt that people have is so painful and so burdensome and so confusing. An example of that is there are certain children, not every child goes through this, but many children do, that just drives the parents nuts when they ask why for as the answer to or as the response to every answer that the parent gives. Why is this? Why is that? Why? You know, so you can see that that child has already gotten himself stuck into the doubt game. What is life really all about? And this can happen at as early as the age of 4. In fact, that's the prime time for it.
Mm.
But what we're looking at is that the more information we get, sometimes the new information creates new doubt, and sometimes the new information helps eradicate the doubt. And so that would mean that it would be wholesome, like the kinds of questions that a 4-year-old will ask will give the parent the idea that they should give 4-year-old answers to 4-year-olds' questions. And they're just setting it up for more doubt. That in fact the way to do it is in fact to get the child comfortable with their own knowledge. By saying, oh, well, you can figure that out, or ask the child questions back about, well, what do you think?
Mm.
All right, and so you turn the tables on them, and so that's basically the distinction between, say, a psychologist and a client versus a Dhamma teacher. It's because the Dhamma teacher wants to know as best he can what's going on inside of the mind of the student, rather than say, I know what's going on inside the student because I studied all of these psychology books.
Mm.
So, in that regard, what we're looking at is the path of the Buddha uh, has various milestones and hallmarks along the way. And those milestones and hallmarks almost always have to do with the eradication of doubt and the eradication of ignorance as we progress. And the very first one is eradication of doubt about whether I can, in fact, think about the things that I want to think about and not think about the things that I'm in the habit of thinking about. The next one, eradication of doubt, has to do with the student knowing that he can stay focused on a topic long enough to understand it.
Mm.
This happens in mathematics. I would say that one of the biggest problems with mathematics as taught in the Western world is they never give the child full confidence that he, in fact, can do mathematics.
Mm.
I remember exactly what happened with me. I had a second grade teacher in the second grade, only a little over 6 years old, and she praised me highly in front of my mom and gave me an outstanding, and that gave me that teacher's confidence. So she gave me the potency, power, and permission at that young age that carried me along, that I could say, no matter how much confused I got about math, that no, I can figure this out. I can get this done. All right. So in Buddha, we think about that from the perspective of what is normally referred to as the first jhana. So in the beginning step, we know that we can keep the mind, that we can clean the mind out when it's obstructed. So the second step is can I keep the mind cleaned out long enough to figure things out for myself? That's the second step. The third step is when we start introducing that jhana dude, just a brand new jhana dude, but he is already getting the confidence that he can figure things out for himself. He knows he can clean out the mind and get the mind unobstructed. So with that unobstructed mind, he can get it into an uninstructed state well enough to know that he can figure things out. That's the second step. Again, eradication of knowledge. Now we're going to put a mind that's fit for work onto the work that's fit to be done, in the sense of uh, what's worthy paying attention to. And the Buddha talks about, all right, when the mind is fit for work and can pay attention, then what's worthy of being paid attention to now is the Four Noble Truths. And so we start working with the Four Noble Truths, and we start recognizing and seeing dukkha, dukkha, dukkha everywhere. Dukkha in all of the people that I meet. When I see a person angry, he's not angry, he's just suffering. We see suffering everywhere. And we also begin to see what the third noble truth is. Oh, this is what it's like to be free from suffering. Just throw that stuff out of the mind and take on that third noble truth and have a little Dhamma moment. And so we begin then to eradicate the doubt about, oh, yes, I can come into a state of little Dhamma that is so happy and so peaceful, and that I can do this. I'm not in it all the time, but I can do it when I think of it. And I'm developing that skill too, so that I can think of it more and more often.
Yeah, and also once you said that, like, you're basically enlightened if you can be what's the word? If you can be satisfied all the time, basically. And then this was really big for me because, yeah, I always worry, like, is this good enough? Am I mindful enough right now? And yeah, this basically puts an end to it if you really do it.
But that's been the German mentality for well more than 100 years. All right? Who makes Mercedes? Who makes BMW? And what are the two best cars in the world? And I rest my case, because you've got that disease, the very disease that is required to build a Mercedes.
That's true.
And it is painful. The Mercedes is beautiful, but it's not perfect. All right, so that mentality is that it can always be better, it can always be better. We change that to no, we're successful because we become satisfied, contented. But that takes a kind of new skill development, but we know that we can develop that skill too. So that's again part of the eradication of the doubt. All of this in line with understanding suffering and no suffering means that the next step is we start to say, oh, wow, I've really decided that this is a very high bar for me. Can I, in fact, meet this bar? Am I up to the Dhamma? Because I recognize that the Dhamma is pretty high standards. Very high standards indeed. But we've already got all of the skills. We've already been developing those things that eradicate the doubt about this. So what we begin to do is say, all right, the next step, I become dedicated to telling the truth, to being honest with myself, and to, if I do make some mistake or do something wrong, I take open responsibility for it.
Yeah.
That's hard. Why? Because we've been taught our whole lives to hide and lie and to get away with murder and all kinds of things like this.
Yeah.
But that next step, the fourth step of this eradication of doubt is, can I actually live up to the Dhamma? The answer is, I demand it. Why? Because the only option is continued suffering. We've got no choice.
Yeah.
All right. And in the sutra, the Buddha talks about it in the sense that if a young monk or if a monk recognizes that he has broken a rule, then he feels obligated to go to his teacher or an old monk of a friend who's going to do the right thing with it and confess. That in fact confession of sins is something that they do with the Patimokkha. But one of the early Patimokkha of the Buddha was when he looked around and then he asked the monks to look around and say, do you see anyone here that is unworthy of being here because of offenses? And all the monks sat quiet, saying, no, we're not going to criticize one another. All right, so a lot of stuff came out of that, but one of the most important things is that each monk now has to be responsible for watching out for his own bad behavior, and one of those bad behaviors would be going out and criticizing other monks for the bad behavior they see in them. And this is exactly the same thing that Jesus was talking about when he says, why are you looking at the speck in another's eye when you've got a log or a beam coming out of your own eye? Okay, but he was using that metaphorically, and a lot of people misunderstand it, but there's enough truth and wisdom in there that people can understand. That's exactly what's going on. It's a two-pronged issue. And that issue is that it's not my job to find out what's wrong with other people or to criticize them, even in my own mind, but rather to see them rather in a state of suffering. And I know what suffering is because I've been there and done that. And so there's no reason to criticize others, but rather I have to take full responsibility for my own behavior and my own actions. And so the question and the eradication of doubt at this stage is, can I actually live up to that? Am I actually willing to confess? Am I actually willing to take responsibility? One of those things that it was a very slow, long process, but because of the way that I was raised in poverty, that I was always raised in the situation of being frugal, saving, but that also made me very stingy and non-generous.
Mm.
So I had to find a way of being frugal and generous at the same time. And it actually takes a practice. We actually have to start practicing intentionally giving things to other people. Ultimately, the best gift that can be given is the gift of the Dhamma.
Mm.
Why? I can't think of anything more valuable.
Yeah.
If Bhikkhu Buddhadasa had given me 20 baht of gold, which is worth thousands of dollars, 35 years ago, I wouldn't have that gold. But he gave me the Dhamma instead.
Mm.
And I've still got that because it's so valuable. And that's the way that we begin to look at it, is that it's so valuable
Mm.
because that's the tool that we need to have that very life that we were in doubt that we could ever have. And so now we're working at that fifth phase. That fifth phase is doubt about whether I can, in fact, follow the path and stay on it. The Buddha uses an example of that is that even though a cow who has newly given birth to a calf, that even while that cow is eating grass, still she's got an eye on that calf. She's going to know where that calf is every instant.
Mm.
And that the Buddha uses the analogy that in the Wat, that even though a monk may go about doing his duties such as sweeping or cleaning or other things like that, still he has his eye on the Dhamma. We know that that's the only thing that's worth thinking about, knowing about, or having on the mind, is keeping the Dhamma there. That's another eradication of doubt. Because, and it answers the question, what's it all about? The answer is it's all about suffering and no suffering. The answer is the path.
Mm.
So as we go through this, what we're doing is we're building up to the fruit of full sotapanna, the full stream enterer, who has full eradication of the doubt about what is the path and what is not the path. All right, there are two suttas that work hand in hand with this. One of them is Sutta number 24, and the other one is Sutta number 48. And so right now I've been working mostly with Sutta number 48, but I'm going to change now into Sutta number 24 because it has a wider stance. But at this stage of Sotapanna, something amazing begins to happen in the fact that we become delighted with the Dhamma. We become fascinated with the Dhamma. We fall in love with the Dhamma is another way of thinking about it. And that love affair that we have with the Dhamma, that delight that we take in the Dhamma, is the final full step of the fruit of Sotapanna. Why? Because we're experiencing the fruit as joy.
Mm.
And it is the joy because we have the knowledge and vision of what is the path and what is not the path. So basically, at this level, we've got literally all the knowledge that we could possibly have in the sense of eradication of ignorance and eradication of doubt. So, why then would ignorance be the last item on the list of fetters, when in fact it was the first one to go?
I mean, ignorance goes pretty deep, right?
Yes, it does, right. Because there is ignorance that is formed in doubt, and then there is the eradication of ignorance that has to do with an adventure. All right. After one becomes fully fruited in sotapanna and starts to work then on the fourth and fifth fetters, which have to do with feelings, we begin to know more and more about what the path is and who we are, because we're in fact out there eradicating fetters in a way that almost all the other people who know about these fetters are failures at. An example of that is Christians who take the ceremony of taking Jesus as their Savior and they free from sin, they still get angry. They may be getting angry about how the baptism is done. All right. But once we get to that state of sotapanna, of knowledge of how paticca samuppada works, knowledge of how the mind works, knowledge of how the Four Noble Truths, etc., work, now we begin to have the actual knowledge of the success of practicing the Dhamma and following the path. And we have deep, deep confidence in this path. Now, this confidence is often translated wrongly as faith, but it's not faith because the word in English for faith almost means a belief or just simply taking somebody's word for something.
Right.
This is confidence based upon absolute investigation. Okay, this is like a scientist, or maybe even an entire team of scientists that have worked for years setting up an experiment, doing the experiment over and over and over again, and proving to themselves that this is in fact right, that there is something new here, and now they have confidence to publish a paper on it. That's what we mean by the confidence, okay?
Right.
The first time they performed the experiment, in fact, and it worked, they were probably surprised. And so we move from that success that's based in surprise of something new into the confidence of watching feelings and being able to change our feelings over and over and over again so that we're no longer a slave to these feelings, that they do not, in fact, belong to the reptilian mind or do not belong anymore to instinct. Now, the frontal cortex has a choice about what he's going to feel. And we do that often enough that we have confidence that we can begin to handle any situation. And this is beginning to be reminiscent of that very first step, because the Buddha said that no matter how obstructed the mind is, now we're talking about it again, no matter how obstructed the mind is in the sense of the way that we're feeling, we can still clean that out and continue on. That we will in fact fall down. Can we in fact, after we fall down, are we going to lay there and complain about whatever we've tripped over? Or are we going to get ourselves up, dust ourselves off, and happily start all over again? So this is actually a way of looking at it, is the same thing as kind of climbing a mountain. Now, in the regard of, we got an idea that we're going to climb the mountain, that in the beginning what we do is we start studying maps, we start looking at pathways, we start seeing what others have done, we go to let us say the valley below the mountain, and we get all the gear and all the equipment that we're going to need to climb that mountain. All right, that's the state of sotapanna. Is now we're going to go off and we're actually going to climb that mountain, and we can even give that name, that mountain, a name, me. I'm going to climb that mountain of me because I know what it is now. So the viewpoint or the perspective that we have in the valley, that is filled with vim, vigor, vitality, curiosity, interest, happiness, joy, delight, and love affair of climbing that mountain, is completely different than what it's like after we've gotten halfway up that mountain. Why? Because now we can turn around, we can reflect, we can look at what's going on, we can see that valley below, and we can recognize all of those people down there in the way that the comings and goings. the comings and goings of beings, is based upon the fact that now we've got a really, really elevated view. We can really see what's going on with the world. We understand what society is. We can put things together because we've got a much higher perspective. And that higher perspective is based upon the fact that, human beings could, in fact, control their feelings if they knew how. And what a wonderful world this would be if they would. Then our politicians would be altruistic rather than selfish. Well, now we're understanding that being on the path itself is actually an eradication of ignorance of things we didn't even know that we didn't know. Right? So the first eradication to become sotapanna is the full eradication of all doubt and complete certainty. But now the scientist is doing new experiments and he's getting new results that he didn't even anticipate. Beginning to see new things. But we haven't climbed the mountain yet. Once we get to the top of the mountain, now we have an entirely new perspective, because when we were on the side of the mountain, the only thing you could see is the one valley below. From the mountaintop, we can see all directions. We can see everything. And one of the qualities of being at the top of the mountain and seeing everything is we begin to recognize the unity or the wholeness. We really do see how small the Dhamma is. It really is just one word, suffering and no suffering. That's all there is to it. And yet in the beginning, the students see, and they're right to see it this way, just the Tripitaka itself is 45 volumes. It takes an entire bookshelf just for the Tripitaka. Now imagine all the books by all of the authors. I mean, we've got Chuladasu, and we've got Daniel Ingram, and we've got all of these Mahasis and everything like that. Everybody wants to write a book. And so we've got all of this information about Buddhism. And so the student in the beginning has a lot of doubt. He's completely overwhelmed. But once you're at the top of the mountain, you recognize, oh no, it's actually quite simple. It really, really is very, very simple. And this is that final eradication of doubt, is to recognize I'm just like everybody else. And everybody has a choice about how they're going to feel, and nobody knows that. That's the real knowledge, is the knowledge of being able to control how we feel. And so that final eradication of ignorance also has more and more concepts of confidence built into it. All right. An example of that is the other arupa fetters, arupa asava, that are, and I was taught to call them the higher fetters, where in fact are not higher at all. Everybody's still got them. But we have various successes in getting rid of them. But once we learn how to manage and control our own feelings, now we've got a really good handle on these higher fetters, the things that are inside the mind. Well, actually, every time we exercise and every time we are successful, every time we catch ourselves, for instance, comparing ourselves with another person and stop it, that's a little bit more eradication of that kind of doubt, a little bit more confidence that I can, in fact, master the entire Dhamma, because if I was able to master feelings, I can master anything. So eventually we begin to look at, for instance, aruparaga. Can I, in fact, manage my own death? Am I confident to do that? Well, that final knowledge just says, yes, I've done it all. There's several sutras that talk about it. The holy life is lived. The job that was to be done has been done, and that the mind is pure as a polished shell. All right. And that in some respects, there's nothing left to live for. We actually now have to find something to live for, because self-preservation instinct and thanatos, or death wish, are now becoming under our control. And so we actually need, and one of the best ways of doing that, or finding something worthwhile living for, is for the spread and teaching of the Dhamma. I can't think of a better reason to stay alive. Secondary would be to make sure that my daughter does not have the grief of having her father die in childhood.
Mm.
But those are the only two things that are worth having: is the life of the Dhamma and a happy death, because we're ready. We finished the job, and even that still does not stop the learning experience. That in fact, by teaching the Dhamma, I learned it even deeper than I knew before. Finding new things, finding yet a new dust particle on the floor, etc., like that. And so it becomes a delight of discovery, which is that final ignorance. There's another part too, and that is that we also understand that some things we will never know. That knowledge and the eradication of ignorance are not exactly the same. That we can have full eradication of ignorance and still not know some things. The Buddha, in fact, gave us a list of 4. Those 4 are what happens after the death of a Dhammadut, of the Tathagata, of one who can be in the here now. And there's quite a lot of information, and both in the Udana and also in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, that talks about the last hours and moments of the Buddha's death. And he was always, right to the very end, more interested in the welfare and the benefit of the students. So the question then is, well, what happens after a Buddha dies? Because if you can answer that question, then you can say, well, what if the Christians or the atheists or who this are right, whether if a Catholic heaven or a Hindu heaven or whatever it is like that, that almost in all regards, except for one small thing in Christianity, and that is you have to have Jesus to be your Savior, to save you from your sin. But what happens to someone who has already done all the work necessary to become free from sin? What happens to him? Does he waltz into heaven and take a look around and say, this is nice, but I'm moving on? We don't know. That's the answer to that question. That's an unknowable. Now, if we can do that for the Buddha, we can do that for everyone. We do not know what's going to be the outcome after the death of anybody. But if we can put it to the perspective of, we don't even know what's going to happen to a Buddha after he's dead. We have no clue. Don't know. And it doesn't matter. Why does it not matter? Because we don't have a whole lot of ghosts, goblins, heavenly beings, hellish beings coming down, except for 1 or 2 cases, to take over the world. Donald Trump comes to mind, but he's still real. He's not an apparition. He's not a spook. He's not a ghost. He's just a human being in pain.
Yeah.
All right. And so, in that regard, we have absolutely no evidence, or better still, we have no way of determining any of the things that happen about the stories about after death. So, we will just have to leave that in the world or in the state of unknown. Actually, you can look at that as an instant. I'm going to find out. Boy, I can't wait until I die so that I'll know for sure what death is, because right now nobody's sure. We don't know what it is yet. Unfortunately, when I'm dead, I probably won't be conscious enough to figure out what it was that did happen. Okay, so that's a major point, is that there are some things that are unknown and what the future will be. Never mind after we're dead, we don't even know what's happening tomorrow. We can make plans, but we don't know. And in fact, that unknowing about the future is why we make plan B and plan C and worry and fret and all of that kind of stuff. But if we can give it that we actually don't know, and it's okay that we don't know, because we're good enough. Whatever it is, we can take care of it in that moment. That's again that confidence that comes with the eradication of that doubt. No more doubts means I don't care what happens when that for instance, that trip to Bangkok, we'll get her done. No worries, nothing to care about. It'll happen, and if there is a problem, I won't know about it now and fix it.
Yeah.
I got to wait until it happens, and then we'll deal with it.
Yeah.
So the next one is kind of surprising, and that is, what is the extent of the human mind? Now, this was originally under the influence of people who have never had jhana, don't know what it is, and so they do a lot of speculation. But we don't have to just use it in the sense of jhana. We can use that in the sense of anything. An example is that we have one example of a device that was found underwater in a shipwreck that's dated around 2,000 years ago, and that it is an intricate clock of the way that the cosmos works, so that you can spin the dial and figure out what planet's going to be where and that kind of stuff. And until
Sorry,
that,
what can you? I didn't understand. What can you figure out?
well, it's a mechanical computer to figure out the positions of the stars and the planets.
Okay.
And it's more than 2,000 years old. It's sort of like the grandfather clocks that we have from the 15th century, except that people were doing those way back when, and we had no clue that they had been able to figure that out. Now let's put it in reverse order. And that is, the people in the time of the Buddha had no concept of what technology would be. Let alone that in the 1960s, when I'm taking a course in mathematics and computer science, and I get my first handheld calculator, a TI. Known, in fact, that was that one actually had buttons on it. The first calculator I had, it was little copper pads with a stylus. And you had to make the contact in order to get that calculator to work, okay? People who were beginning to work with calculators and equipment like that had no idea what was going to be in 2018. We had no clue about what the extent of the human mind was going to come up with.
Yeah.
The same thing is true paying forward. We do not know what is going to happen into the future technology-wise. We don't know what's going to happen in anything like that, but the extent of the human mind is such that even in the beginning of the Dhamma practice, we do not know the extent of our own mind until we start to evaluate it, discuss it investigate it, start to learn to manage and manipulate the feelings. But even at this level, after we've been able to complete the Dhamma practice, we still don't know the extent of the human mind. It's unknowable. We do not know what's going to happen with the future, nor do we know what the extent of the mind can do.
Because there's just like levels that we can't like consciously reach, right?
I'm sorry, I missed something. Say again?
Because there's just levels of mind and that we can't even reach consciously.
Exactly so. Even Einstein said that he could see what he could see in mathematics because he was standing on the shoulder of giants. In fact, Einstein was a huge fan of Newton. That in fact, if we didn't have Einstein and only had Newton, then we would be bowing down to Newton, because it was only in the past 10 years that that automobiles have had to need anything to do with what Einstein was doing. That up until 10 years ago, and still 99% of all of the automobile is based upon Newtonian physics. Without Newton, you do not have BMWs, sorry. With or without Einstein, we still have really excellent BMWs. We still have really excellent Mercedes. But we do not know what effects Einstein is going to have on the automobiles of the future. We just don't know. It's unbelievable that we just don't know what things are going to be like, because we do not know the extent of the human mind. What's it going to be like when we get implants so that we can access directly the internet? We'll probably have that, and then we'll all be Watsons. Or what's it going to be like when we hook it up to AI so that we don't have to do a lot of the, we can do guidance kind of thinking? That means that now the mind is going to really become a meta mind. Because AI is doing a lot of the intricate work that would be impossible to do. Just as an example of that was back in the 1950s and 60s, early 60s, NASA was using women. There was a whole women's corps because they were the ones who could sit there and do the calculations necessary to do all the computations that they needed for rocket science, to get those rockets to go up in the air and have a trajectory and all of that kind of stuff. They actually call these women computers. So when they actually got a mechanical machine to do that kind of stuff, guess what they called it? They called it a computer, because it was actually doing the work that these human women were doing. Now look what the computers are capable of doing. If one day we'll be able to hook up the human mind to the AI, and then that will be a huge leap forward, and we do not have a clue about what that's going to be like. You and I sitting here now do not understand what the future is going to bring in that regard about what is capable of the human mind. Unbelievable. Okay, the next one is, what is the beginning of it all? We know that the Christians and the atheists really have a big fight with the scientists too about Big Bang theories, evolution, creationism, and all of that kind of stuff is for naught. It's digging deep into the past, trying to figure out things that we do not need to know. Take an example, evolution versus creationism. Except for the scientific evidence, the actual issues are irrelevant to your particular life right now. You can be a miserable human being like everybody else, or you can be a marvelous Dhamma dude, and it does not matter where we came from. Isn't that amazing? It's an irrelevant issue. What happens after death? An irrelevant issue. What the mind is capable of, we don't have a clue, but for right now, it's an irrelevant issue. What happened in the beginning of time, we don't know. We don't have a clue. But what we do know is that it's an irrelevant issue. Why? Because there is no evidence that we can look at and say definitively we know for sure what happened. Well, that's almost the case for everything in the past. We really don't know what happened. We don't know how things got started. An example of that is two old women who hate each other's guts. And they will chat and yak and gossip about each other. But if you ask each one of them, well, where did all of this stuff? They don't remember. They don't know. They just know that they hate each other. And they haven't a clue about how it got started or why. If, in fact, they would go back and do that research to try to figure out what it was, and they do it in the same room with each other, they might walk out of that room as friends to recognize that whatever it was non-consequential, not the way that we're dealing with each other.
Yeah.
All right. So the last one, and this is the one that seems to be the most frustrating to the people in the Buddhist religion. And that is that we do not know the results of action. We do not know if our good actions will bring good results or if our bad actions will bring bad results. We do not know the extent of karma. Just like we do not know the extent of the mind of human, we also do not know how the Dhamma is going to work into the future. So, in fact, what we're looking at here are the unknowables, have to do with what happens after death, what was in the beginning of time, what was in the past. In the karma, we're looking at what's in the future. We don't know. The extent of the mind is we don't know because that's into the future. So all of these unknowables are basically rooted in the qualities of the past and the future. And we don't know those things. We never will know those things. But we can still be confident, 100% wholly, happily confident, that it don't matter what happens, we can handle it. Another example of that confidence is when we begin to have confidence over the restlessness. I've left that one to last because that seems to be our personal favorite.
Yeah.
And that is to recognize that there will be some restlessness that will come up from time to time. You do not know what the future is going to be, but what you do know is that no matter what it is, you can handle it. You can take care of it. You have the confidence to be able to do that, and you have the skill developed of sati so that when restlessness does come up, you'll know it. You can see it. You've worked with it before. You've recognized it. And so by continuing to do that, you begin to own it. Own that restlessness, just like we learn to own feelings. I can change my feeling from I like it to don't like it. I can let this internal restlessness be managed in a very happy way. Because we're not going to just sit on the floor our whole lives. We are going to be active. We're going to be out there doing our Dhamma deeds. We're going to be actually practicing generosity. So in that regard, that basic energy that used to be a terrifying thing that drove me to do stuff ignorantly, now I can use that as a tool to get things done. An energy. Because it's refined now. That restlessness is no longer an agitation. Now it becomes an extra power, an extra kind of power, a new kind of city, a new kind of idiopata. And it also adds, by the way, to that quality of being a lion.
Mm.
Because with restlessness as an issue, it victimizes us. But now with full knowledge, we can use it as a tool because we're in control of it.
Mm. Yeah.
All right, so this is the last way that we begin. I begin now to describe to you the whole path laid out from the perspective of ignorance, but we're covering that all of the 10 fetters. The first 3 fetters were knowledge of a personality view, knowing that I am not what I thought I was, and that part of my discovery is to figure out who I am, and then later we figure out that that's not possible. I will never figure out for sure because I'm a moving target. In flight, not static enough to give a definition to. It's like, what airport are you in? I'm not in an airport. I'm flying. Undefinable location. So, the fetters, as we remove them, gives us further and further confidence that we can handle everything. And we have the skills to do that. And we have confidence that we have the skills to do it. But we also recognize that there's not much left to be done. The job that needed to be done has been done now. The holy life is now being lived. We're living a state of mental purity, and I want to make sure that we're talking about purity as separate from perfection, because nothing is perfect. The question is not whether you can find your imperfections. The question is, can you enjoy the heck out of finding them? And happily recognize them when we see them, because they will always be there. There's always imperfections. But what we do have is what we call purity. And what I mean by purity is very much like water that's drinkable. There is some water that's polluted. Some water is polluted and we don't know it's polluted, but it's poison with heavy metals or arsenic or something. And then there's polluted water that's polluted because it's dirty. In any case, we know the difference between water that's good enough to drink and water that's not good enough to drink. And yet, we do not want or necessarily need to have distilled water. That in fact, distilled water doesn't exist even in nature. Pure, perfect water, that's only water, distilled through evaporation. But rainwater, the clouds in the sky need a piece of dust. They found, in fact, the best one to use is silver nitrate that will seed the cloud so that water droplets, tiny little things before it's a full drop, will start to form around this dirt, so that when it and as it falls through gravity, because it's now being condensed. In other words, it's cloud until it touches a particle, a small dust particle. So as it rains, not only does the water molecule itself gain, but it also picks up other things that are in the atmosphere as part of that water drop. So rainwater, not perfect water, but it is pure enough to drink. So this is the way that we look at the mind, that the mind is not going to be perfect, but it is going to be pure enough to be completely enjoyable. So nothing is going to be perfect. We're not going to eradicate all of the ignorance, and in fact, we cannot wait until the end to eradicate all of the ignorance. In fact, the eradication of the ignorance, which is most easily expressed in the beginning as doubt, is eradicated along every step of the path. Every step of the way is further and further in the eradication of ignorance. And so that's why it's left as the top of the list, the last item on the list, where in fact, for all practical purposes, it's the first one that we deal with. Because the first three fetters, in fact, in the asava sutta, in verse number 11, it talks about by paying wise attention to the Four Noble Truths. By paying slow, long, wise attention, three fetters are eradicated, and this is under the section of the asavas that are eradicated through seeing. All right? So that means that even to become a sotapanna is nothing but the eradication of ignorance, one ignorance after the other. The ignorance of being a victim and not knowing it, the ignorance of thinking that you can't change when you can, the ignorance of thinking that you cannot hold your mind into a state that makes it really fit for work, when in fact you can do that. The knowledge that you can, in fact, figure out the Four Noble Truths to the point that it becomes liberating. You can do that. Then the next fourth one is the knowledge that it's better to be free from suffering than not free from suffering. I'm going to really work at it now. I'm going to recognize what I've done wrong. I'm going to be honest. I'm going to tell the truth. The next three then are deeper dedications, with the end result of, this stuff is wonderful. This is such great Dhamma. Oh, wow, I love this stuff so much. That's the full sotapanna, and that's the fruit of the sotapanna, is this joy that's based in the Dhamma, that I've got a tool, I've got a gift that's so valuable that it keeps me happy all the time, or most of the time. And when I'm not happy, it's my job to figure out when, where, why, and how right now and fix it.
Yeah.
Okay, so these are the eradications of ignorance right along. And so, as I said, almost all of the ignorance is eradicated at the sotapanna level. So it's actually the walking of the path that eradicates more ignorance. The knowledge and vision of actually being able to control the feelings, be able to control our fear, control our anger, to control our sensual desire, wanting to have pleasure. And in fact, wanting to have pleasure is actually quite easy, because at this stage we've already got the Dhamma. What other pleasure would I want? And so as we progress through, it's all more and more and more eradication of ignorance. As we complete the other stages, we begin to see, oh, this is what it's like to be under the influence of the self-preservation instinct, and this is what it's like to be free from it. This is what it's like to be afraid of death, and this is what it's like to be free from that fear. So actually, in that regard, you could say that the final ignorance is the ignorance about what real freedom is, because you have to experience that freedom to know what it is. Like somebody who is in prison and they want out of prison, and they have to wait until the end of prison and they think about it. But that day when they get out of prison and they walk out that gate and they take that deep breath, and every one of them does, every one of them will take a deep, free breath, because the knowledge of getting out of prison is so much better than the knowledge of I want out of prison. Wanting that freedom and having that freedom is a completely different experience.
Yeah.
And so this is why ignorance is the last one on the list, is because that ignorance is only dispelled completely once the other fetters are dispelled completely. And yet, we still won't know anything. In fact, we if anything, not a know-it-all. We might know it all, but we're not a know-it-all. A know-it-all is one who thinks he knows it all. In fact, what happens is that we begin to see the vastness.
Mm.
The unknowability of just so much that, in fact, we really are ignorant. We really don't know anything. All we know is the very important things that needed to be known, and that's the Dhamma. But the rest of it, there's so much. There is so much
Mm.
that we can learn something from everybody. Because there is so much knowledge out there that we'll never get. We will always be mostly ignorant. We'll never get answers to the questions of what happens after death. We'll never get answers to what's the extent of the human mind. We'll never get answers to what the future is going to bring. It doesn't matter how many simulation models. In fact, that's one of the things that I've learned from computer science a lot. Especially by having some associated with, I think it's in it's in Huntsville, Alabama. The United States government and the Weather Bureau has computers that are as big as a city, and they still cannot figure out what the weather's going to be. It's just too complicated. And if we can't figure out what the weather's going to be, how can we figure out what a government's going to do 5 years from now? It's not possible.
Yeah.
There are just too many variables. There's just too much information that needs to be processed, and no way of gaining that data.
Yeah.
And so we have to leave the whole world as a joyful discovery.
Mm.
That sitting at the top of that mountain is not like, oh, I like that, and then finish. Oh, no, now we've got a whole world to inspect. And we start becoming more and more altruistic, more and more compassionate, more and more curious and interested about the lives of others. Because we've finally gotten this one fixed.
Yeah.
And so now we've covered the fetters, but we haven't covered everything yet. There's still more, especially dealing directly with practice.
Mm.
And so after this talk, what we'll do with each other is go more and more back into practice. But I wanted to give you this long talk. It's supposed to lasted, 5, 6, 7 hours now on the fetters. So that you got a really good, solid, and not only that, but thank you for putting up with me so that we could get this on the video. Because I think that into the future that this is going to be very useful for people.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it's really made things clear for me.
All right. Well, I'll see you soon.
See you soon. Thank you so much.
All righty.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.